The false promise of Satan, you shall be like gods. May 14, 1994. My dear people, there are two schools of thought about the state of the Catholic Church in the United States. One school of thought holds that while there are serious problems, the Church itself is basically healthy and that a continued proliferation of committees and workshops will solve in a natural way all that ails it as a visible institution. The other view is that the Church in the United States is desperately ill. The difference between the two groups lies in how they see dissent with fundamental teachings on morals and doctrine, and whether there is a continued and chaotic desacralization of the sacrifice of the Mass and other sacraments. The first group looks at dissent from church teachings about morality and notes that dissent has always existed, always needs addressing, and is oftentimes justified. This group sees the current problems in the Church as not radically different from what they have always been. The first group also tends to see the decline of vocations and conversions as the result of paganism, rampant in civil society, not as resulting from any new and grave defects within the apostolate itself. After all, they say, even if the American Church has been lax in allowing dissenters on these things into teaching positions in schools and catechism classes and official diocese offices, the presence of the dissenters is not really a serious deterrent, either to vocations or to conversions. A problem, perhaps, they say, but not a devastating obstacle. There is no loss of the transcendent and sacred, only a re-emphasis on the dignity of redeemed man. Vocations are to be attracted and recruited like volunteers for the military. Make the job appear enticing, glamorous for a life of self-glorification and fulfillment, and seminary doors will be broken down by those seeking ordination for the social order. A second group sees a different kind of dissent as the most basic problem. This dissent is much more pervasive and more destructive to the apostolate itself. It is dissent about the last judgment, on Christ's teachings that there shall come in the next life a final and permanent division of humanity into those who are saved and those who are damned. Why is this dissent so destructive? Because it makes the other questions irrelevant. It does not matter that those who dissent from common Catholic morality are presumed to still be on the path to salvation. If all people are to be regarded as the saved, whether they dissent on any of the teachings of the Church becomes a matter of mere technicality, a technicality which even God himself ignores. Furthermore, this second group sees that the decline of the sacred leads to a loss of faith in the teachings of the Church as revealed truth. If the Mass is no longer viewed as, or treated, in the practical order as the sacrifice of Calvary, if Holy Communion is a mere expression of fellowship, with no reverence for the real presence, if the reception of matrimony and the other sacraments has nothing to do with a state of one's soul or a recognition of contrition and sanctifying grace, then in practice, the very faith is not only shunned but denied and ridiculed. The modernists are like a stage magician who has the audience looking intently at what he is doing with his right hand, when his most basic flummery is performed with his left hand. The critical problem is how dissent is decoyed. Why should anyone volunteer to make sacrifices necessary to become a priest, brother or sister, or to become a Catholic, when the transcendent has no relevance, when the sacramental traditions are supplemented by vacuous gestures of arrangement of church furniture with ever more novel ministries? When everyone is told that, regardless of one's creeds or behavior, everyone is acceptable to God. On this basis, vocations are foolish and conversions are quixotic. As benevolent as it sounds, the promise of universal salvation is the false promise of Satan. So it was in Eden. So it is today. Satan proclaims one theology. Tremendous numbers, particularly of the smorgasbord Catholics, subscribe to it. It is this dissent that must be addressed. Christ does not teach that immorality leads to heaven.